KMC,
HD3 Detroit,
KJAQ,
HD3 Seattle,
WBMX,
HD3 Boston, and on AOL Radio and Yahoo Launchcast. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com. Believe.
How should you respond when ghosts try to communicate? What do you do when you have ghostly birds flying out of your wall or hear horses galloping down your hallway?
Hey, and welcome to the 124th broadcast of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and opening the show today was that of my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad.
They may wonder why I was asking ghost questions as we began. Well, I'm afraid that our scheduled guest for tonight, our good friend, the great one, Stanton Friedman, had to reschedule to a later show because he wasn't able to get home soon enough after an appearance in New Mexico this weekend. So he's somewhere hanging in the air somewhere between here and New Mexico, I guess, or between Canada and New Mexico. As a result, Ben and I will take the show here to do an hour open line broadcast, catching up a little on our ever-growing mountain of emails. No matter how many shows we spend on those, the mountain doesn't seem to stop growing. Taking your calls and hearing updates from some of our show reporters.
So lines are open, and feel free to join us today. Our call-in number, again, is 248-545-SOUL, and that in English is 248-545-7685. Or if you're listening on the computer, you can use that epic instant feedback feature on the right of your screen as you listen live.
Okay. So let's take our first email. I know that some of our reporters are going to be calling in today. Invite them to do so. In the meantime, we have an email from Miranda in New York City. And Miranda writes, if you would do so, Ben.
Miranda writes, something in our apartment is driving us crazy with weird smells. Sometimes they're nice, like cooking or perfume. Sometimes they're disgusting, like rotten meat. And what kind of ghost is this?
Okay. Well, the first thing I notice is that she assumes it's a ghost. And I notice that she lives in an apartment, which is something that is conducive to all sorts of sounds and smells. Okay. I would say that you should first try and make sure, Miranda, that you're not smelling your neighbor's cooking. Okay. Our producer suggests that you clean out the fridge. Mind your business. Well, anyway, so I do suggest that you kind of look at those more mundane things that could be going on with your neighbors, okay? On the other hand, there are many cases that we have run into in which there have been some substantial phenomena that are accompanied by very strange smells, some of which are even unidentifiable. We find, in our opinion, that it is sometimes time slips. You'll smell your father's pipe, say, after he's been long gone, or that you have encountered some perfume that was very familiar with someone you knew or someone who had lived in the house before. The neighbors might say, oh, yeah, she wore that kind of perfume. So that's all possible. But I think initially check out your neighbors, and in your apartment environment, it's always possible. You've got to just rather than an inter-world situation, inter-apartment situation. Okay. Here's one. This is about other worlds. Okay. It's from Gail Harris in Spokane, Washington.
All right, and Gail writes to us, hi, Paul and Ben. You have totally changed my opinion of the word haunting. Is there any particular kind of otherworldly creature, one that's not human and not a parasite, that commonly turns up in hauntings?
Yeah, I'd almost say from our last show we did this afternoon, our special on the internet, we had one that kind of turned up, and we've encountered this sort of species, I might say, in a case I hope we're going to be talking about tonight with the person who's experiencing it. Donna, our reporter from Connecticut, will be calling in later to share that with us. And, we're talking about, Ben, the very tall...
Yeah, there's the other one that's like a little short guy. Like, remember the main case when, like, they had all the videos of all the things, and then there was just this one...
Yes.
Yeah,
That was really strange. We got to isolate that image and get it onto our talking points page. But in the main case, there were a lot of parasites. There were several parasites involved in this case. But the photograph they were able to obtain of I'd say mid-sized dwarfish creature.
Yeah.
Would you say that sort of coming in a door very clearly and standing in a room, and whether that's the one that would influence the famous doll. We've talked about this case before, but there's a doll involved that isn't possessed or any of that stuff, but it does seem to move around a lot when this critter or these creatures are present. And that's one, a sort of a dwarfish, semi-human looking creature from whatever world it comes from, I don't know. But more common in our experience, too, is the very tall, very thin, a little bit bent over, a strange kind of cranium, long-headed, as our previous guest said, sort of creature that seems to turn up in a lot of these cases. So these are, in our opinion, so far, not human, but also not parasitical. So I guess that would be some of the more common ones that were brought up. There are others that have not, been quite identified by us. There was the case of California/Idaho, one that we still want to pursue, where the woman wrote in and said that they had seen this creature running at great speed down a dirt road, all right, in California, and also that it had been seen by several people at several different times, and it was always running. And it seemed to be sort of pseudo-human. I mean, one thinks of the Roadrunner or something in the cartoon, but nevertheless, sort of a semi-human creature that did not match the description of either the very tall or the dwarfish creature here. So, yeah, okay, well, we're very glad that we've changed your opinion of what hauntings are. I think they are very, very significant and very different from what the common narrow-minded approach is. I think we're dealing with whole other worlds, not just some spirit world. And anyway, here's we'll just move on from that. But if you do happen to run into any of these strange creatures, let us know. You can always get in touch with us through our website, behindtheparanormal.com. Here's a question from Steve B. in Lexington, Kentucky.
Yes. I couldn't sleep. I was so creeped out by Paul's story of the two shamans who went into other worlds and brought people back from the dead. How do these other worlds or dimensions really work? Do we all have the capability to cross the boundaries like shamans apparently do?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Yeah, that story creeped a lot of people out. It certainly did me when I first heard them, and especially when I heard the second one, the guy telling the same thing I'd heard on the other side of the world from the other shaman. This was essentially a case where, one of the things that convinced me that we're dealing with other physical worlds that are parallel to ours rather than just some spirit world or two-dimensional spiritualist kind of approach. And these people had died. The families begged the shamans to go into the other worlds and bring them back. And they literally did, according to what I was told. And they went in and one just literally grabbed the kid by the arm. The other was a grown man, brought him back. In the long run, it turned out to be a very bad idea. They didn't fit. It was not their world, really. They knew some of their families, but not all of them. It was a disaster from one end to the other. And but I thought the amazing thing was that it proved the other world thing by the fact that the guy especially would walk to work every day right by his own grave. So pretty cool in some ways and pretty awful in others. So again, how does this work? How do these worlds or dimensions operate? Do we all have the capability? Steve asks to cross the boundaries like shamans apparently do. Well, as I've said on the air before, I'm a sort of paranormal socialist. I believe that we all should be able to use the paranormal should we have the maturity and the ability to do so. We all have the ability somewhere in us. Had we not been, if you want to use the word psychic or adept in some way, we never would have survived our ancestors never would have survived the early days on this planet because they would have been eaten alive. They didn't have any defenses. And psychic power is one of our survival mechanisms.
And dreaming. Don't forget about dreaming.
Oh, and dreaming, absolutely. From psychic power, you know you're being watched. You know there's danger. You sense danger. This is all just what this is. And dreams...
Well, yeah, dreams. I mean, they say that usually there's significance or whatever in your dreams, but that's just because it's going on in another world and all that fun stuff, and then your consciousness is all over the place. Like when you're in between that state of being awake and being asleep, you hear things and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, we do touch other worlds, I believe, very strongly when we have some very interesting conversations about dreams almost every day. If you really research them, you find out you learn a lot, and you're in the same places many times. You meet the same people, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's one way we can cross the boundaries. But as far as literally doing so like the shamans, I think it happens to us all the time. See, what we're dealing with here is not what Hollywood is talking about. Remember those old shows, Quantum Leap and all that? Hollywood never quite gets it right, even if they try, which they probably don't try very hard. These worlds are not in isolation from one another. They constantly interact. The best way to think of it is, well, one analogy is if you take an old vinyl record or even a CD, all the songs on that CD are all there simultaneously, but you experience them one at a time. And you can experience the one that comes after the one you like, or the one before that, or the one on the farthest end, or you get what I'm saying. That's one way to think of it. You can think of it like playing cards that have. Remember, I don't know if you remember any, because I'm not this old, but back in the 1890s when the first films came about, you could the principle was that they would flip one photo after another. One photo would be in sequence, and it would look like the horse or whatever on the pictures was moving, because there'd be a slight difference in each one as you went. So that, in a way, each of those cards or frames was a universe. You think of it that way, and that we're constantly passing through these, and constantly they're changing. Others are branching off. But they're just as real. There was a lot of controversy in physics about how this actually does work. But in our experience, particularly my 40 years of doing this is the conclusion I've come to, that we're dealing with real complete worlds here. And we're down to 1 minute before our break, but let me just continue to answer his question here. And that, I think, is what shamans know. I think our ancestors knew this. I think the shamans really knew it and knew how to use it to help everybody. Because just as Dr. David Deutsch from Oxford says today, the great physicist, you can reach into other worlds, use them to improve our own. Bring them in and make what we need to be real. And if we could do this together and talk about accomplishing change and doing things together, boy, this takes it to a whole new level. So in any case, to answer Steve's question here, I think, yes, we can do it. It's not all that difficult. I don't think we need machinery to do it. I think we kind of do it all the time. It's a matter of being aware, being accepting, and most of all, being together in this. I don't believe in people being able to make their own world. Yeah, to a point, yeah. But I think we need to do it together, and that is where the power really comes from. So we're coming up on our first break here on Behind the Paranormal, and we'll be right back with some more emails and some calls. Stay with us.
The I'm Thankful Network for inspiration, education, and collaboration. Show host and creator Sue Lundquist has the endless energy, compassion, and charisma to carry her mission. This mission of positive change and communication, while also creating a maintenance tool within a safe environment, providing a resource of knowledge through dynamic professionals in their receptive fields. Join Sue Lundquist, I'm Thankful Network, 12 to 1 Eastern, on the Sky, Tuesdays and Thursdays.
CBS Radio's The New Sky. NewSkyRadio.com.
Drove downtown in the rain, 9:30 on a Tuesday night, just to check out the late night record shop. Call it impulsive, call it compulsive, call it insane. But when I'm surrounded, I just can't stop. It's a matter of instinct, it's a matter of conditioning, a matter of fact. You can call me Pavlov's dog. Ring a bell and I'll salivate. How'd you like that? Dr. Landy, tell me you're not just a pedagogue. 'Cause right now I'm lying in bed, just like Brian Wilson did. Well, I'm lying in bed, just like Brian Wilson did. weighs 300 pounds, and though I was very heavy, I floated till I couldn't see the ground. I floated till I couldn't see the ground. Oh, somebody help me. I couldn't see the ground. Somebody help me. Couldn't see the ground. Somebody help me. Because I'm lying in bed, just like Brian Wilson did. Well, I'm lying in bed, just like Brian Wilson.
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com.
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben. And we are, unfortunately, without our guest tonight. Stanton Friedman, the grandfather of UFO studies, was supposed to be with us, but he had a schedule problem and is suspended in midair somewhere between New Brunswick and New Mexico. And we've rescheduled him for a show in June where we can hopefully be with him then. So we have an open line show tonight. We're expecting some of our reporters to call in. And we are going through some of our mountain of emails, and we never have enough time to go through those. So we're having a ball tonight. We've dealt with some ghostly questions and things. And here's one on animals. And this is from Chad in San Antonio, Texas.
All right. I've been a ghost hunter for a couple of years now. I've been in some houses where animals freak when there are phenomenon in other houses where they don't. Why do animals react to ghosts in some cases and not in others?
That's an extremely good question. I often wondered that in the early years, and some don't want anything to do with it. They will freak, as Chad suggests. And also, we had Wyatt, the ghost hunting dog, and I understand there is another ghost hunting dog out there now, but this gets down to the issue of what exactly are the forces that are causing paranormal phenomena. We've had some discussion on this show that maybe sometimes, at least, the investigators are causing paranormal phenomena. Now, I get very suspicious about a lot of these EVPs and things, and where they're really coming from. And I think back to a guy I knew, Ted Sirios, who was able to look into the lens of a camera, and what he was thinking of would come out on the film and the camera. Sometimes he didn't even need a camera. Look at a packet of film, and the bloody thing would come out right on that. So as a result, I wonder, maybe some of us are causing this. So if we are causing something, I don't think the animals are going to get upset. There are other times when there are entities present, in our opinion, and that seems to be when animals get especially upset. There are other times when, and I'm thinking of the major poltergeist cases I've been involved with, where there have been major appliances floating around the room, large pieces of furniture, and the animals seem to be afraid of the furniture flying around, but not of anything else. And that's why I suspect that entities are not necessarily present, but the energies, a la the Hutchison effect, if you know what that is, we're going to have him on at some point, but the energies that do permit the travel between worlds of these entities are there and can and wreak strange havoc, as it were, with space-time and even with gravity. So I think that when there is an entity, animals get upset, and when there is not, they're only just forces, animals might be upset, but maybe not. So that's the best answer I can give to you, Chad, on that, because that seems to be what we've found. We have our good friend and our show field reporter from the Southwest, Kyle Dayton, on the line, and let's see what Kyle has to say for us tonight.
Oh, hi, Paul and Bennett. Thank you for taking my call. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course.
No problem.
I wanted to follow up on what we were talking about last week that had to do with possible contact or paranormal contact from loved ones that have passed.
Yeah, by all means. Our whole show last week was on paranormal love and beauty and good things that have happened, and Kyle didn't have a chance to finish, so please take it away.
Well, thank you, Paul. I had left off where I had mentioned Matty Stepanek, who died at age 13 of a rare form of muscular dystrophy, and how he seemed to be very advanced and kind of like an old soul. And I wanted to follow up with that. There's a book that was written by a researcher, one of the early near-death researchers. Her name is P.M.H. Atwater, and she wrote a superb book called The New Children and Near-Death Experiences, and it was published here by Bear and Company back in, not too long ago, 1999 and 2003 for second edition. And it was the first book of its kind to tell the story of near-death experiences from a children's point of view.
Wow.
So, if you get a chance to check that out, The New Children and Near-Death Experiences by P.M.H. Atwater. Very interesting book, and what you were talking about. And also, too, I had two quick animal stories that had to do with, I guess, love from an animal that had passed from the other side. And when I had called before, too, a while ago, I had mentioned I had an experience with my father after he passed, and I could taste tomato soup on my palate about a week after he passed when I was sitting at the computer, and I didn't know if I wanted to go into that again because I'd already mentioned it on the air.
Oh, but it's a beautiful story. Go right ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, my father passed away in June of 2005 from lung cancer. It was a very painful death, and about a week later, and it was about 1 a.m. in the morning, I was sitting at the computer and not really thinking of anything, kind of, just vegging out and kind of recovering from his passing, and all of a sudden I get this taste of tomato soup on my palate. It was as if I had just finished a bowl of soup. And the one thing that my father and I had in common when he was alive the last several years of his life was we loved tomato soup. So I would, make recipe with the milk and butter and all that stuff, and we'd share it. And it seemed to be like he was contacting me from the other side because I felt this energy coming from through the ceiling, through my head like a beam, and on my palate. It was very, very strange. And I wasn't thinking about soup, and I wasn't thinking about my father at that moment, but it was almost as if he still had awareness from wherever he now was, and he could even have some kind of influence from the other side. And
very physical experience.
Yes, and I sensed it at the time as a loving and reassuring gesture.
Mm-hmm.
And with my grandmother, Minnie, who was my mother's mother, she passed away in hospice in 2000. And the last 5 days of her life, she was spent in hospice there in, it was either Good Samaritan or Thunderbird Hospital. I don't remember which one offhand, but she was basically in a coma because she had had a stroke. So all the time that we were in there, at least one family member was always there with her 24/7. There were 4 of us, me, my mother, and my 2 female cousins. And not once while we were there did we hear any kind of announcement or music or anything else over the loudspeaker in the hospice lobby. But on the morning that my grandmother died, on that Saturday morning, I believe it was July 4th, it was around 4:05 in the morning, and just a few minutes later I started to hear the sound of birds chirping and singing, and the sound seemed to fill the hospice lobby. And at first I thought the birds were awake outside, but then I looked out through the window and realized that it was still pitch black outside. Then I realized the sound was coming over the loudspeaker, so I assumed that one of the hospice nurses had put a CD in to play it, because my grandmother loved the sound of birds like more than anything. That was just one of her favorite sounds in the world, chirping and singing birds. She loved it. So I said to one of the nurses, "Thank you for playing that bird CD." And the nurse looked at me and she says, "No one's playing a CD." Then I looked in the nurse's station and saw that no one was in there. And that was kind of odd. But then about an hour later, it was around 5:10 in the morning, still dark outside. My family and I were getting ready to leave the hospice, and we were in the process of saying thank you and goodbye to the nurses when the bird chirping started to slowly fade out, and about 15 seconds later, there was now the sound of music over the loudspeaker. It was like leaving a theater after the play has ended, like lobby music.
Yes.
It was very, very strange, and it was kind of like orchestrated lobby music, and that was kind of odd. And then one of the nurses said to us, "Well, this is hospice. Things like that happen back here all the time. We just deal with it and go on." So,
well, yeah. Again, like last week, I could tell stories from when I was working in the psychiatric ward as a student in Ogdensburg, New York, and the things that would happen, just things like that. Just amazing.
Well, that would be an interesting book.
Yeah, actually, don't look now, but it's actually going to be in my next book.
Okay. That. Well, hey, I'll be first in line for an autographed copy.
Okay, well, I'll hold you to that. Okay. Now, you also said that there is was a crow.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the name of the crow, but you said
yes.
It's funny. We're just talking about animals too. We had an email on the reaction of animals to paranormal phenomena, that sort of thing. So, what's the story with the a crow who was very close to you for was it 22 years?
22 years, yes. Well, I have 2 quick stories. One has to do with my crow Albert, and the other is an article from a very credible source. Yes, Albert was my American crow or common crow. He was at least 22 years old when he died on March 21st of 2000. I had him for that long time. I don't know. He may have been a young crow when I got him. He had a crippled over wing, healed over broken wing, so there's no way he could have been rehabbed to the wild. And we were very close, and we got to the point where I videotaped him putting things in order, like sticks and pencils and stuff, and he'd make shapes with them. It was very, very strange, and so we got very close. He was like my 2-winged baby, and so he died on the morning of March 21st of 2000, and he was scheduled for I'm getting upset thinking about it. I'm so sorry. He was scheduled for surgery to remove a huge fatty tumor across his breast, and they put him under anesthesia. He never came out. So it was about 3 or 4 days later, and I was sitting in my mother's office in New River, which is North Phoenix, and at the time there were no crows in the neighborhood. You'd see an occasional crow, like once or twice a month, maybe passing through, and you'd hear the caw, and and there'd be no crows. So I'm sitting in my mother's office, and I hear this caw, caw, and I looked out her window, and about 2 streets over on the telephone pole, here sits this crow, and this is the only place in the whole house that I could have seen this spot.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. So it's sitting there, and I'm thinking, well, I'm kind of overwhelmed a little bit and thinking, I wonder if that's a sign. And all these things are going through my mind and thinking, well, I want to go get a video camera. Then I thought, no, because what if this crow leaves in the meantime? So it's been there, it sat there for 3-4 minutes, just sat there. And I get this feeling that maybe it was a sign, because crows are basically, some people consider them portenders of death. Is that close enough for you?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and maybe 2 to 4 minutes later, I hear another caw, 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 and there was another crow that flew up to it, landed on the telephone wire, and they both flew away together. And
isn't that interesting?
Yes, it was very interesting, I thought, and at the time, like I said, there were no crows in the neighborhood that lived there. None had moved in yet, so it was just kind of really, really, the timing was very, very strange. Very
well, speaking of animals, I don't know, in my experience anyway, I don't know about you, Ben, but animals birds in particular seem very, very sensitive to many paranormal phenomena. It's funny, when we moved into our house here in northern Rhode Island, we only came from the next town, but our neighbor up the road said, there were never any crows around here until you came here. I don't know about these Enos, but then a flock of vultures appeared over his house. So I said, don't talk to me about crows,
I'd rather have the crows any day.
No, you never see too many turkey vultures in New England, but now they're famous. They're on the YouTube, the Woonsocket, vultures. Anyway, but sensitivity to the paranormal indicates to me a greater contact with it. So perhaps, as I say, birds have always been associated with these things. So maybe it's really, really true.
I think so. What was kind of reassuring, too, to know that he wasn't crippled anymore, or something. His spirit was free because, 22 years of his life, he could just watch the crows fly over, the birds fly over and stuff, and he, couldn't fly with them. So it was kind of bittersweet, if you know what I mean, and it's like giving up a child. It was pretty rough at the time. And I have another quick story, so I know you may be approaching a break. I don't know if you want me to tell it now or what have you. But we got just maybe a minute. Okay.
Okay, whatever.
So go ahead.
Well, 1 minute. Yeah, go for it.
Well, it's a story that Kenneth White wrote in the Arizona Republic. He used to be the head of the Arizona Humane Society, and it's called A Cat's Bond Lives On. He had met a doctor. The doctor relayed this story to him as a personal experience, and the doctor says that this actually happened. He had a cat named Marty, and he had him for 15 years, and the cat developed breast cancer and died. During Marty's life, she was a gray tabby. She was very close to the doctor's father, and whenever the doctor's father would come to visit, she'd just forget everything and just be by his side. So a few months after Marty died, his father died of prostate cancer, and soon after the dad died, the physician went to bed, and he felt a cat crawl under the bedspread, and there were other cats in the house at the time, and he didn't think anything of it. So he went to pet the cat, and he realized it was his cat Marty that had passed. He threw back the covers, and there she was, making a nest with her paws and purring. He gets choked up, and he says finally to her, "I've missed you, Marty." And then he hears his dad say, "We've both missed you." The lights were still on, and then he rolled over, and his father was there, surrounded by a thin white, blue, almost neon light, was grinning, not wearing his glasses, no longer paralyzed, propped up on an elbow and looking fabulous. Marty the cat walked over to him. He scratched her behind his ear, and this wasn't the odd part about it was the physician's grandfather. He went to visit him back east a few years later, and the grandfather, all he wanted to do was talk about the physician's father, the son-in-law.
Yep.
And
wow.
then he finally said, "Your father."
I'm afraid we have to wrap. That's a beautiful story. We're going to have to wrap. Kyle, thank you so much for calling. Okay. We're going to have you back. I think we're just going to have a whole show on animals.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Behind the Paranormal, folks. We'll be right back.
Psychic Radio. 24 hours a day. Reach out from beyond to your ears. On the web now. Log on to psychiconair.com. Your spiritual well-being is our concern. This is Psychic Radio. Powered online by AOL at psychiconair.com.
We know you're listening.
Put on my blue suede shoes and I boarded the plane. Touchdown in the land of the Delta Blues, in the middle of the pouring rain. W.C. Handy, won't you look down over me? Yeah, I got a first class ticket, but I'm as blue as a boy can be. Then I'm walking in Memphis, just walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? Saw the ghost of Elvis on Union Avenue, followed him up to the gates of Graceland, and I watched him walk right through. Now security, they did not see him, they just hovered around his tomb. There's a pretty little thing waiting for the king down in the jungle room. When I was walking in Memphis, I was walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? They've got catfish on the table, they've got gospel in the air, and Reverend Green, be glad to see you when you haven't got a prayer. But boy, you got a prayer in Memphis. Muriel plays piano every Friday at the Hollywood, and they brought me down to see her, and they asked me if I would do a little number, and I sang with all my might. She said, tell me, are you a Christian child? And I said, ma'am, I am tonight. Walking in Memphis, I was walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? Walking in Memphis.
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com. Believe.
Welcome back to Behind the Paranormal here, and we are about to move from our emails to a case in Connecticut that certainly is one of the most remarkable I've ever worked on, and it was one of Ben's first, and it also is certainly one of the most remarkable that I've ever even heard of, never mind worked on. And we have Donna from Connecticut.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Ben. How you doing?
Hi. Good to talk to you. Donna's one of our very faithful show field reporters, but we don't give her last name because we don't want the entire paranormal universe descending on her poor house to see what's going on here. So we haven't mentioned any of the latest reports you've sent us, Donna. So why don't you just fill us in? We're particularly interested in the bird who flew out of the wall and the ruckus in the basement.
Well, we had a white bird. My daughter very plainly saw it. It flew from the inside of the center of her bedroom wall. It fluttered halfway across the room and flew through the side of her big antique bureau. And we've been having some small streaking black orbs more frequently than we have had in the past. Usually you may see, one or two very small ones occasionally, but it seemed to be one evening here we had a full-bore rash of them in our dining room, moving from left to right in most cases. And I believe it was Thursday morning, 7:15. My daughter came and woke me up. She said she hated to get me out of bed, but she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I immediately jumped out of bed. She thought someone had broken into our cellar. I went down, followed her into her bathroom, and I stood there, and something literally sounded like there was a moving crew in our basement. There was material being dragged around. There were feet stomping. It was slamming. It was banging. It almost sounded like it was going to hit under our feet where the ceiling would have been downstairs. And it went on for quite a while. And when it subsided a bit, I went outside, and I went around the outside, the perimeter of the house, and took a quick look, and nothing had been disturbed. Our first thought was someone had broken in. It sounded more like 2 or 3 people. They were making so much noise. And I hesitated calling the police because of a lot of the experiences we have here. I pretty much figured they were not going to find anything if they came all the way up here. And then the next morning at 7:15, the exact same thing happened again, and it was almost exactly at 7:15 in the morning. I went down with her, and we stood in the bathroom, and directly under our feet we heard the exact same banging and slamming and rumbling and things tipping over, and it was just sounded like a fiasco down there. So I stayed in the house all day, and I waited for my husband to come home, and I made him go down. I said, please go down and see, what. I had no idea. And he came up, and he said, there's absolutely nothing down there. It was dead quiet. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing had been knocked over. And we had clearly heard, oh, my gosh, it sounded like someone was absolutely ransacking the place.
Let me ask you this, Donna. When this is you and your daughter both heard this,
right?
To the best of your recollection, on both occasions, when you heard this,
right?
Was it exactly the same? To the best of your recollection,
it was exactly the same. The first time was louder, and it lasted just a bit longer than the second time, but it was almost exactly the same.
Interesting. Okay, now some people would, probably most people would say, aha, residual recording on the environment of something. Say I don't buy that. That's not good enough. What I think is happening here is that you've got, your house, and we've been working with you on this since 2005.
Right.
And we've been obviously in your basement. Your whole house is, as we've discussed many times, a sort of Piccadilly Circus or Times Square of the multiverse. You've got all sorts of currents coming together on that spot. And this is the case I'm referring to when I refer on the show to recently having heard of these various kinds of creatures that just are not really human, but also not anything to necessarily worry about, but just weird species of different worlds coming together, hopping through your living room,
right.
And then maybe not to be seen again. I like the horse galloping down the hallway. That was a great one.
Right.
And certainly you've got this sort of intersections and where the worlds meet. You're going to hear the same thing again and again and again. And then they'll come apart and you won't hear it again, or you'll hear something else. So that's the reason I ask that. The interpretation that we discussed just this past week, actually yesterday, was that I believe that your great-grandparents are still and this is a long story, as you know, in the basement. They are terrified of you because they think you're ghosts, all right? They don't quite know who you are, and this is why you will sometimes hear the deep voice saying, out or get out or whatever. And when people hear this, they say, aha, it's the classic ghost saying to get out of their place. I don't believe that. I think these are people who are experiencing you just as you experience them. They're going about their lives. And then you come tromping in. I don't mean you necessarily, but you being anybody who was having an experience like this.
Right.
And they become frightened. And what I would say, get out. People do. They say, I'm paying the mortgage, you're not, get the heck out, that sort of thing. So I think what you're experiencing here is just a time problem, probably a space-time problem. And I think that it might be their world in which this, perhaps this poltergeist activity, perhaps this ruckus is actually taking place. I don't know. We haven't been there lately, and we're going to be over there in a few weeks.
We have to get over that. Well, not in a few weeks. I'm not going to be here in a few weeks.
I know. Well, I'm thinking of maybe going myself. I don't want to leave you out of it. But
whatever. I'll be there in spirit.
Well, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, you graduate in two. Anyway, we'll figure it out. We'll work it out. We'll get over there. Because, they're always, you always want to keep an eye on something like this. Okay, so that's our story of the basement thing. What else can you tell us?
Well, the last 3 nights actually, I set a tape recorder up. I brought my husband down with me, or my daughter. I'm still nervous about it because it was just so loud and violent the way it was carrying on down there. But I did set a tape recorder up in a very quiet spot and toward the back of the house where it wouldn't be affected by the furnace or anything else going on. It's pretty quiet down there, and as you know, we live out in the country, so we're not near a highway or anything. The first night, I got it sounded like someone coughing. It was like, and it was right by the tape recorder. It wasn't coming. I know it wasn't coming from elsewhere because I could hear my daughter's clock chime during the night. It taped for about almost 2 hours, and I heard her clock chime, and it was so faint that you could barely catch it. But I did hear that. I heard what sounded like a very heavy door closing, very firmly closing, I might add. But it was apparently a very heavy-sounding door, and we don't have any doors down there like that. In fact, there's only one door that does close, and that's the outside, the door that goes to the outside, and it's bolted and deadlocked. I heard approximately 24 very sharp slams. They all sounded exactly the same. They weren't rhythmic. They weren't clustered. They were random, and it was the same sound every single time. And it's very hard to explain. It was almost like somebody slamming a cupboard door shut. And then I heard the next night I heard the repeated slammings again, and then I heard a very deep voice say the word come. Almost like, you'd hear these like old-fashioned, deep-voiced ministers is what I'm thinking of, come, I don't know how it, but that's what I heard. And there was a lot of various mumblings, change in tone in the sounds of the tape.
Okay.
But
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we have to wrap for a break. But stay with us, Donna, and we'll continue in just a moment. Stick with us.
Join Mystic Radio with Rob and Alexis Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern and 12 noon Pacific as metaphysical mother and TV personality Robin Alexis helps countless people around the globe live fuller and more conscious lives. Robin serves you using her gifts as a medium, medical intuitive, past life reader, and more. Get your free on-air readings Wednesday at 3 Eastern and 12 noon Pacific right here on the Sky. And check out Robin's Soul Spa at robinalexis.com.
I was so high I did not recognize the fire burning in her eyes, the chaos that controlled my mind. Whispered goodbye, she got on a plane, never to return again, but always in my heart. Oh, this love has taken its toll on me. She said goodbye too many times before. Her heart is breaking in front of me, and I have no choice, 'cause I won't say goodbye anymore. I tried my best to feed her appetite, keep her coming every night, so hard to keep her satisfied. Oh, kept playing love like it was just a game, pretending to feel the same, but turn around and leave again. But oh, this love has taken its toll on me. She said goodbye too many times before. Her heart is breaking in front of
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com.
Hey there, and we're back with Donna from Connecticut. Donna, we're talking about your amazing case, and if I could just ask you to hold on for just a second. We have a question from Marion in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
It's got a ring to it.
Oh, yeah. It pretty much just states, what do you think about mediums?
What do I think about mediums? What do you think about mediums?
What do I think about mediums? I think most of them are full of crap.
Okay. Sound like that caller we had on the other show. Well, essentially, there are mediums. It's a very ancient custom and phenomenon by which people supposedly will communicate with the dead. I think anybody can do that simply through love. What I'm concerned about is mediums who, of course, make a living at it, do it for money, and will certainly maybe not be real or will take advantage of the grief of those whose loved ones have passed, okay, to put it in the traditional sense. On the other hand, there are those who I think are sincere. We know some. I've worked with one or two. I kind of take them with a pillar of salt, but nevertheless, I think they are sincere. They have real gifts, but I think very often they misinterpret those gifts. For example, you're driving down the road. You're in the car. Suppose it's Ben and me, okay, and you see a thing lying in the road up ahead, and Ben says, aha, you got roadkill up there. It's a dead buffalo. Well, not buffalo, but say rabbit.
A dead buffalo?
Well, I'm exaggerating. Rabbit, all right. And I am coming up and saying, oh, no, it's a pile of rags. And we get up there, and it's neither. Maybe it's, something other than a pile of rags or buffalo. But the point is that people can have the same perception of something without getting it right, without interpreting it properly. I think that's the case with many mediums. I think they just are stuck again in this 19th century assumption that that's what the world is, and that there's this spirit world, this kind of two-dimensional thing. I don't know, it makes me sick. I know I'm always talking about it, but I can't help it. And it narrows thinking. It makes you ask the wrong questions, in which case you cannot get the right answers. And it just really narrows things down to the point where the tremendous blossoming of the mind, openness, and tremendous vision that should be the paranormal isn't. It just turns into this two-dimensional thing, which I just have no patience with. Anyway, so I don't know. It depends on who the medium is and what they're doing and whether there's love there. That's the thing I'd look for, is love. If there's love there, then there is sincerity, and the person, if their gifts are real, might be able to be credible in some sense. Okay, back to Donna. Donna, I'm sorry to have interrupted. We're talking about your very curious basement here and these tremendous sounds that have been occurring. And I had expressed the opinion that what you're dealing with is you've got family members. And this house was built, has 6 generations of your family apparently still in it. And
Exactly.
and I think that your grandparents, I think if you can, when you go down there, if you can reassure them, even by speaking of your love and compassion, and that you're not a threat, and just be calm. And you have a wonderful family. It's full of love. There's humor, and that's just what you need to protect. Because heaven only knows what would happen if you were the Mansons or something in a place like this. And down you go, and just sort of again, compassion and love and reassurance, and you might end up having a beautiful, beautiful experience with a loved one.
Paul, there is an odd story. My great grandparents, they had an apartment, a small apartment in the basement, because they wanted to be independent. And this house is large, as you know. And where I placed the tape recorder was where they had a small kitchen area and they had a small bathroom area. And my daughter had gone down there the first time. She heard it before she came and got me. And she had taken her dog down there, and the dog slipped its collar and wet the floor and came back upstairs again. And she proceeded, and she could hear a man's voice talking, but there was banging going on, and she said basically drowned out the voice, and she became scared and came back up also. She was afraid she was going to run into something she didn't want to run into, and she wasn't aware of what it was at that point.
Yeah.
But the story is this was my great-grandmother, and when I was born, I had a tumor on the back of my head that was cancerous. And I was only 6 months old, and, of course, at that time, everybody was extremely concerned. They didn't think I was going to make it. And my great-grandmother was so concerned. She paced and paced and paced and paced back and forth, and she was wringing her hands. She could hardly contain herself. And finally she said to my mother, she says, I'm an old woman. And she said, if that baby could pull through, she says, I would very gladly give my life so that she could survive. And as soon as they found out that I was okay, they came home and they told her. And within a half an hour, she sat down in a rocking chair and she passed away.
Really?
She did. And my mother had told me the story, and she said that, that she was very peaceful, and she sat in the chair, and my mother sat with her until the doctor came. And she said, it made her nervous because, my grandmother, her legs would slip a little bit, and she said the chair would creak a little bit. But she said she did. She literally sat down in her chair and died as soon as she found out, within a half an hour. And she hadn't really been ill up to that point or anything, but that's what happened.
That is really beautiful. I think there really is a connection there.
There is.
And I could be wrong about all this, but we'll find out when we get there. But this is just how it comes across to me. And one of the most remarkable things about your remarkable case with this circus you have going on around you is that, I don't know, and I think Ben agrees, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but sure, I have never picked up anything overtly negative about your situation. Usually you'd expect some parasites or something to be there, but you've had some scary experiences, especially that serpent-like thing. But just because some alien creature is weird-looking to us and scary doesn't mean they're evil.
Yes, it looked like it was curling around a friend of my daughter. She just sat and looked at him with her mouth hanging open, and it looked like it was crawling around. He kept like brushing the side of his neck and rubbing his arm, like he felt something. And she was sitting across from him, and she just looked, and she said it looked like it was wrapping around his arm and just going up like across the back of his neck, and then it just disappeared.
The creature itself didn't seem to be too aware of you.
No, not at all. And the only time that I can remember anything that really scared us, my daughter was probably 7 or 8 years old, and she was coming down the staircase, and something held her against the wall, and she could not physically get away from the wall. And at one point,
that could be Hutchison effect.
Right, and then at one point in my life, I had one of my arms pinned to the bed, and I could not get my body off the bed to even wake my husband up to reach him to tell him, and I was just like paralyzed. Like I couldn't move, I couldn't talk, I couldn't move, and my arm was literally pinned to the bed. My right arm, I'll remember it. You could feel a pressure on it. It was holding it down.
Mm-hmm.
But we wouldn't have lived here so long if we felt that kind of negativity.
Yeah.
But, and we get thrown so many different things at us that we don't have a chance to even get used to one thing and it's something else.
Yeah.
So you have to take it individually as each occurrence happens and analyze it at that point.
Sure. Well, we're going to keep after it. And we'll see you sooner than you think, I hope. And keep us posted. We talk to you very frequently, sometimes almost every day. And we're gonna keep up with it. And I'm sure you're going to be safe. And we're going to have to cut it off here, I'm afraid,
okay,
Donna.
Paul.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you because we gotta go. We're out of time.
Okay. You too. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye now. Okay, don't forget podcasts.
Guests on all our shows are available at newskyradio.com or at our show website, behindtheparanormal.com.
Amen. And thanks to our producer, Will Kosnick. We'll see you right here next Sunday, April 4th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on CBS New Sky Radio and newskyradio.com, when we will welcome back Frank Ficino, author, speaker, UFO aficionado, and monster expert for a discussion about the monsters of his native West Virginia and of the Appalachian Mountains. It'll be a very unusual show. Don't miss it.
In the meantime, check out our Saturday show at 11 a.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific on WOON 1240 a.m. in southeastern New England and onworldwide.com. Also, you can hear rebroadcasts of our Behind the Paranormal show on Saturdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific, right here on CBS Radio.
And somebody said they tried to call in last night and got all frustrated. They said, that's the rerun. Anyway, Sunday nights we're live.
Yeah.
And we'll leave you with a quote from that old sweetheart Albert Einstein. Maybe we've used it before, but it's worth repeating. Intellectual growth should commence at birth and cease only at death.